Hello and welcome to Stained Glass Gaming, where I turn video games into glass. For those of you that watch my stained glass video game videos, you are probably familiar with the general process. Glue paper, cut glass, grind glass, foil glass, solder, and patina. Some of you watch for the entertainment. Others watch because they want to know the process. In this series, I will give an in-depth explanation for how I make stained glass. This is all from my experience of doing stained glass for 5 years. I don't know everything, and some of what I might say is incorrect, but there are multiple ways of doing things. For each step, I will explain the tools needed, the purpose of the action, and give some thoughts based on previous experience. I have also included timestamps in the description, so you can jump to any step you need. If you want to know more, I have included a link to the stained glass subreddit page. Before I go through the steps, I need to go over safety. While stained glass isn't as dangerous as other hobbies, you'll still need to take some precautions. Here is what I recommend. Clothes you don't mind getting dirty, such as a long sleeve shirt, pants, closed-toed shoes, safety glasses, a dust mask, hat or bandana, gloves, and a fan. Step 1. Finding a pattern. Patterns and designs can be found anywhere, or even created. It is really up to you on what you want to do. There are books that are filled with patterns for stained glass. I use images from the internet. I'm not creative when it comes to making up my own designs though. I work better if I'm given something to use or work from. Step 2. Picking glass. Once you have a design or pattern, the next step is finding glass. If you have a local glass shop, buy from there. If not, then try online. I myself use a local glass shop and buy online. When finding glass, you'll likely come across fused and stained glass. These two types of glass are very similar, with only a minor difference. Fused has something called COE, coefficient of expansion, which basically means a measurement of the rate that glass will expand and contract when it is heated and cooled. Fused glass is meant to be heated in a kiln, and depending on the materials in the glass, expands and contracts at different rates. Fused glass is more expensive than stained glass because the COE is more critical. Stained glass has no COE, and is not meant to be put in a kiln. In my experience, fused glass can be integrated into stained glass projects, but stained glass cannot be integrated into fused glass projects. It is pretty much impossible to tell stained glass from fused glass when looking at it without labels. The general rule of thumb for fused glass is it will be clearly labeled. If it is not labeled, chances are that it is stained glass. Stained glass is produced in different thicknesses, which, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter. Glass comes in either smooth or textured variants, single or multicolored, and in different sizes. The general rule is that textured, multicolored, and larger pieces of glass are more expensive, though it does depend on where you buy the glass from and the manufacturer. Another important thing to note is that certain colors are more expensive than others. This is due to the materials the glass is made of. Lots of colors come from lots of metals. For example, gold is used to make some red and pink mixes. In my experience, the shade of pink I want to use in future projects is really expensive, so I probably won't use that shade of pink in my future videos because of the cost. When handling glass, it is a good idea to wear gloves. The edges of the glass are sharp, and if the glass slips, it will cut you. If you like to live dangerously, then don't wear gloves. It's a matter of preference really. Step 3. Tracing or cutting out the pattern. Depending on your preference, the pattern can be cut out and glued onto the glass, or traced onto the glass. Remember to number the pieces in either case. If you want to trace the pattern onto glass, I recommend having a light box. I don't recommend using a window to trace on, as the glass can fall and break. I don't have a light box, but I used some old acrylic and my phone flashlight when I needed to glue googly eyes onto the glass. You could probably use a plastic container or something that is transparent to trace the pattern onto the glass. It doesn't necessarily have to be a light box. I personally prefer to cut out the pattern and glue the paper onto the glass. If you are tracing the pattern onto the glass, see step 4. If you are cutting out the pattern, see step 5. Step 4. Tracing the pattern onto glass. Once you have something transparent to trace on, in this instance, old acrylic, a wooden frame, and a phone flashlight, place a light source on the bottom, the wooden frame on top, acrylic on top of the wooden frame, the pattern, and then the glass. In this case, the phone flashlight is just bright enough for me to see the pattern through the glass. If I use darker glass, I would need a brighter light source. Use a Sharpie to trace the pattern onto the glass. There is a pen you can buy for drawing on glass, and it won't come off during the grinding, like the Sharpie will, but I think the Sharpie works well enough. See step 7 if you trace the pattern onto the glass. Step 5. Cutting out the pattern. Make at least 2 copies of the pattern. One is cut up, and one is used for soldering. If you decide to cut the pattern, you will need a different type of scissors. These are called 3-bladed scissors. because there is a gap on one of the sides. The gap takes into account the foil that is wrapped around the glass pieces to be able to stick them together using solder. The gap also ensures that the size of the finished project will be the size it was printed out at, assuming no overgrinding. If regular scissors are used, then the project will be slightly larger than the original image, which is fine if that's what you want. The 3-bladed scissors operate the normal way regular scissors operate. The only difference is the paper in the gap will get stuck from time to time and need to be pulled out so the scissors work properly. If the paper is wedged in and is difficult to pull out, use a paper clip or something small to push the paper out until you can grab it. Another thing to pay attention to is the mobility of the 3-bladed scissors. Since paper can get stuck in the gap, it is easy to tear the pattern. The 3-bladed scissors aren't like regular scissors, where you can change the direction while in the middle of the cut. If you try that with 3-bladed scissors, the pattern might tear. If you need to change the direction, pull the scissors all the way out and remove any paper that might be stuck. Then, come in from a different direction. If you cut out the pattern, see Step 6. Step 6. Gluing the paper onto the glass. With the pattern all cut out and labeled, the next step is to glue it onto the glass. Regular liquid Elmer's glue works well. A glue stick would also work, but I find the paper comes off too easily during grinding if a glue stick is used. The paper will be peeled off once the glass is ground, so there is no need for fancy extra strength glue. If you are using regular smooth glass, the pattern is glued on the side that will be the front of the glass. Basically, the side of the pattern facing up will be the front of the glass. If you are using textured glass and want the textured side to be the front, you will need to glue the paper on the smooth side of the glass. The side of the pattern facing up will still be the front of the textured glass. It just has to be glued on the back of the glass. This means you will have to relabel the paper. Make a reminder that you need to flip the glass when you are putting it together so the textured side is on the front of the finished project. Step 7. Scoring the glass. Whether you trace the pattern onto the glass or cut and glue the pattern onto the glass, scoring the glass is the same. Scoring is different from cutting, though the device used to score the glass is called a glass cutter. Scoring the glass creates a weak point for the glass to break. Use something like newspaper to contain the small shards. This will make cleanup a lot easier. There are many different glass cutters, but they all have the same component: a diamond, steel, or tungsten carbide cutting wheel. I use a pencil type cutter, because you hold it like a pencil. I've also used a pistol grip type cutter. I like both, but the pencil type came in a kit I bought. The next thing I'm going to talk about is debatable, and that is oil. Specifically, oil that lubricates the cutting wheel. I learned to use oil. Now, there is a debate as to whether or not oil actually helps make the cutting wheel last longer and assists in scoring the glass. You decide if you want to use oil. I use 3-in-1 multi-purpose oil. Some cutters also leak, so you probably shouldn't fill the entire oil reservoir. A little oil goes a long way. If the cutter leaks, put a small amount of oil on a scrap piece of glass. Run the cutting head through the oil every couple of score lines. You can either use a ruler or freehand it. I prefer to use a ruler though. It is easier to score the glass while standing up. If using a ruler, remember that there is extra space between the head of the cutting wheel and the edge of the ruler. Make sure to take that into account when lining up the ruler and cutting wheel. Put the cutter on the glass and apply a moderate amount of pressure as you move the cutter along the glass. If too much pressure is used, the glass will break. If not enough pressure is used, then the glass won't be scored and might break into random pieces. Either push away from you or pull toward you. Do not go back and forth as if you were cutting a pizza. You only need to score the glass once. If you score halfway and decide, "Oh, I messed up," tough luck. When the glass is broken, the break will continue through the glass, regardless if the score line extended that long. Therefore, you cannot cut glass at right angles and expect the rest of the glass to be intact. Think of it like stairs. If you want to make stairs, you cannot cut glass into that shape. You would have to use a ring saw or grind the glass to make right angles. There will be a sound as the cutter runs across the glass. I guess it sounds like zipping up a zipper? I don't know how else to describe it. Not all glass will make the same sound. Some glass is softer than others. To make sure you actually scored the glass, look for the score line. If you hear the sound, then you are applying the right amount of pressure. Look at the glass to see if you can see the score line. If the line does not run all the way across the glass, chances are that the glass will break in a weird way. If the line does not run all the way across the glass, move a little further away from the previous line and try again. I recommend trying on some scrap glass to get a feel of how much pressure you should apply. Cutting curves is possible, but I am bad at it and haven't practiced enough to be able to show you. I will show it in a later video though. Step 8. Breaking the glass. Safety glasses are mandatory during this step. Glass shards plus eyes is a bad combination. You might want to wear gloves as well, though it is not mandatory. Once the glass is scored, you will need to break it. To break the glass, you will need two types of pliers: running pliers and Grozer/combo pliers. Running pliers are used for cutting straight lines on large pieces of glass. The mouth is rounded on both sides and applies pressure on both sides of the score line. Grozer/combo pliers are used for breaking small pieces of glass. I will be referring to the Grozer pliers as Grozer. I've never heard of them called combo pliers before. Only Grozer. The Grozer pliers have one side that is rounded. The rounded side helps apply pressure when applying a downward force to break the glass. I make a mark on the middle of the running pliers using a Sharpie to help align the pliers with the score line. Line up the running pliers with the score line and squeeze. The glass should break only along the score line. The only times this may not happen is if the glass is textured or there's a small defect. Sometimes the glass does what it wants. Like clay, glass sometimes has a mind of its own. Score the glass again and use the Grozer pliers to break off smaller pieces. Again, the next thing I'm going to explain is debatable. This time, it is tapping the glass before breaking it. There doesn't seem to be a concrete answer as to whether or not tapping the glass helps to break it. I learned to tap the glass before breaking it. I've tried both ways, tapping and not tapping, and for me, I personally think tapping makes breaking the glass easier. If you don't want to tap the glass though, then don't. Here is how to tap the glass. Before using the pliers to break the glass, tap the back side of the glass. Either turn the glass over and tap it, or tap it from the back. The tapping helps to weaken the glass along the score line before breaking it. There is no need to tap the larger glass, because the tapping will just break the glass and it may not break the way you want. Use the Grozer pliers to pick the small pieces. With the round side down, line up the straight side as close to the score line as possible. If the glass is too small to hold comfortably with your fingers, wrap the glass in a paper towel, paper napkin, or whatever. Push down on the glass using the pliers and the glass should break. When glass breaks, there will be small pieces. Before scoring and cutting more glass, clean up the small pieces. Use a paintbrush and not your hands. The glass can still cut you, and trying to dig glass out of your fingers is a nightmare. After you break each piece, brush away the small pieces into a pile somewhere away from where you are scoring the glass. If there are any small pieces under the glass you are scoring, the small pieces can break the glass you are trying to score. Once you are finished breaking glass, use the paintbrush to sweep all the small pieces into a pile and dump the glass into a container. Hopefully the glass breaks in one piece. Some glass tends to be crumbly and shatters when breaking. As long as the piece used in the project doesn't break, you should be fine. However, you will break pieces you did not mean to. I've had it happen dozens of times. Just recut or trace the pattern, glue it on, and cut it again. And if you don't have any more of the glass you need, tough luck. As one of my art teachers always says, don't get too attached to your project. This concludes part 1 of the stained glass tutorial. I will have part 2 out sometime soon. Remember, I've left links in the description if you want to know more about stained glass. Like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. If I am unable to answer them, check the stained glass subreddit page. My username is Polymorphic Spectre. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next tutorial.